before we start. So everybody, welcome to this virtual meeting. The proceedings will take place live on the internet, so the meeting will be recorded for future viewing. It will assist the conduct of business if participants speak when invited. Members of the public are welcome to view the proceedings, but should not make contributions at this meeting. All participants should mute their microphones and video feed when they are not speaking. This just to avoid any interference when everybody else is doing their reports. Please remember to unmute your microphone and switch on your video feed when it is your turn to speak, and speak clearly and slowly into your microphone, please. Anyone wishing to speak should indicate using the raise your hand button. You should see it on your toolbox in front of you. There should be a little hand emoji. Whenever you want to ask a question or make a statement or anything, if you can click that, and then the chair will see that and invite you to speak. Can I also please ask that you use this facility for each agenda item when you are asked to make a decision on the recommendations? So by using the raise your hand button if you are in an agreement only, and the chair will make that clear through each recommendations. So finally, I ask for everyone's patience with the use of the technology, and I apologise in advance if we experience any unforeseen difficulties, which we shall try to resolve as quickly as possible. So the first item of business is the election of chair for the 2020-21 academic year. I have received a nomination for Mrs. Mann to continue as chair. Is there a seconder? Okay, hold on.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay. And Mrs. Riley, would you like to speak?
Yes, just a second.
Okay, and Mrs. Cox?
Yeah, just to agree the chair.
Okay, that's fine then. So if there's no further nominations, can I ask all representatives to indicate whether you are in agreement for Mrs. Mann to be elected chair? That's lovely. Thank you. Okay, so Mrs. Mann, as chair, I will hand the meeting over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen, and thank you, colleagues, for that nomination and reappointment for this term. We're going to move on to the appointment of the vice chair of the forum, and I believe we have received again one nomination for Jill Belcher to continue in the post of vice chair for forum. So again, we'd like to see if I have a seconder for that. So, Mr. Moody, would you like to speak? And Mr. Moody, if you unmute yourself, if you'd like to speak, just to confirm whether or not that's a second. Okay, I've got Mr. Moody. You're still muted. I can't hear you. If we move on to Paul Ation, do you have a second? We could just hear that.
I'd like to second the nomination.
Thank you. Rebecca Cox, is there a contribution that you'd like to make?
No, just seconding that. That was all.
Great, thank you. So, Karen, I believe we have the second that we need to formally appoint Jill Belcher as Vice Chair of Forum for the 2020-21 academic year.
Okay, yep. So if everybody can just do the icon, raise your hand, just if you are in agreement with that, please. Okay, that's approved then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so we get into the rhythm of when we're done with that item, you can lower your hand, and just to remind people to keep yourself muted. As Karen said at the beginning, it helps with no feedback coming through, and also it may help to turn your camera off if you're not speaking. We'll have the presenters turning their camera on. Wonderful. Okay, we will be moving on now to item 4 of our agenda, which are apologies for absence. And I believe we have apologies from Rebecca Collins and Laura Jones-Moore. If Karen can confirm that and add any additional apologies we may have.
Yep, that's right, Chair. I have no further apologies.
Thank you. And moving on to item 5. Karen, would you like to inform us if we have any reported substitutes for the meeting?
There are no substitutes, Chair.
Okay. And as mentioned in the beginning, in Karen's introductory statement, normally in a face-to-face meeting of Schools Forum, I would at this point ask if there's any members of the public present. I'm not aware if there are, but as we have all been informed, this is a public meeting and it will be recorded. Karen, are you aware if there are any members of the public present?
I think, Chair, from looking at the attendance list, there is one member of the public present.
Thank you. I don't know that person's name, but you're very welcome. And while we're on the subject of welcomes, I'd like to make a few more introductions. I understand that we have 3 new members of Forum attending today, and I'd like to formally welcome them to Schools Forum. Joe Higgins from the Dudley Academy Trust. Chris, hi Joe, good to see you. Yeah, it would be really great.
Hello, glad to be here. Hello everybody, thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for setting that wonderful example. So if the other new members could put their video on so we can see a face to a name, that would be really welcome. I have Chris Cristoforo.
Hi there. Thanks.
Hi, Chris. Have I pronounced your surname correctly?
Yeah, it was pretty good effort first time.
Okay, I'm almost there. Okay, and we also have Christopher Finetti. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, close. Finetti.
Finetti.
Yeah.
Get my stress correct. Okay.
Thanks for the welcome.
Very welcome to you. And I'd also like to welcome Jeremy Keeble, who is the current lead for education outcomes.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Nice to be here.
Great. And you'll be participating and giving us some updates later on in the meeting, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. So let us move along swiftly then to the minutes of the previous meeting. That was the meeting held on the 25th of February, 2020. You have had those papers. I'm going to first go through page by page, just really for any matters of accuracy to determine, first of all, whether or not we can approve those as an accurate record. And then we will take some matters arising that are not elsewhere on the agenda. So if we begin on page 31, if you please indicate just by raising your hand if you have any contribution to make about issues of accuracy. Page 31. 32. 33. Page 34. Page 35. Page 36. Page 37. Page 38. Okay, Angela.
It's just a typo. It says on the last paragraph, the revised Dudley branded framework instead of banded.
Thank you. We will note that correction. Thank you. Very well. I believe that takes us to the end on page 39. So thank you for that one correction, which I'm sure Karen will make. And I would also like to formally record my thanks to Jill, who stood in for me as chair in February and was very helpful in reporting the meeting to me afterwards. So thanks very much, Jill. Right, we do have a number of matters arising, and we're going to take matters arising that aren't listed anywhere else on the agenda. And to begin with, if I can ask you to refer to page 32 of the minutes, and this is paragraph 53 about, this was the feedback from the budget working group, the verbal feedback. And this is really just a matter of process. We had agreed just a couple of meetings ago, about 2 meetings ago, that it would be very helpful to have budget working group provide a verbal feedback to Schools Forum. And that has been, I think, a very successful addition to our agenda so that all members of Forum are very well informed of the proceedings that take place at budget working group. However, we don't have a kind of formal system for nominating that person. And I felt that it might be helpful if at the beginning of every budget working group meeting, as a standing item on the agenda, if we ask for a volunteer of someone who would be willing to feedback, just so that that person is prepared and can perhaps make notes accordingly, that will be helpful. So if you're in agreement with that, I'm very happy to have any comments on that if anyone wants to comment. But if you're in agreement, would you please just raise your hand with the icon so that we can move forward with that. Thank you. We have a number of people agreeing, so if all those in agreement, now take your hand down and raise your hand if you have something to say, please. I think we're all right with that. Fine, thank you very much. We'll make that a standing item on the budget working group agendas. Right, now I think that the next most efficient way to deal with the matters arising, if we turn to page 35 and 36, on page 35 there are a number of matters arising that are covered elsewhere on the agenda, so I won't go through that, but on page 36 there is a very helpful summary there of a few items that we do need to pay attention to. So I will take you through those, and I will invite Karen to correct me if I get anything wrong, and please do raise your hand if you have further contribution. Item 4 to begin with, there was consideration of the wording of the early years pupil premium and free schools meal entitlement, the coordination of that, and I understand that that wording has been redrafted, and you in fact will see that wording on a subsequent paper coming up later on. Item 5, the breakdown of the 10 non-SEN pupils identified in places in independent schools. There was an email circulated on the 26th of March that did come from Karen Taylor. So if you can't remember, if you would like to go back to your emails, hopefully you'll find that on the 26th of March, the details are contained within that email. Likewise, for item 6, the expenditure for servicing of Schools Forum is detailed in the email of the 26th. Item 7, we're going to take today in the combined budget item 11, so we will come back to that. And item 8, regarding the union facilities time, again, that was also detailed, I believe, in the email on the 26th of March from Karen. So Karen will come in to correct me if I don't have that accurate. And if anyone has any other contributions, please indicate by raising your hand. Okay, I see no need to have further contributions there. Moving along on to page 38. Travel and transport, there'll be a further update in item 11. Under paragraph 58, the Directorate of Children's Services verbal update, the heading officer appointments, you will note that it was suggested that we invite the head of the service for SEND to future meetings. And in fact, we're really looking forward to that. I understand that that's Tony Dwandu, and we're going to invite her to attend the future forum meetings in the autumn term. I know Kath was going to see if she could come last minute this evening, but I don't know if she was able to do that. I don't see her on the participants list. So, Kath, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, unfortunately, Tony had a competing appointment tonight, so she couldn't, but she is very much looking forward to joining the forum and participating in it. So I can confirm she's all geared up to attend when we send her the next, if we can include her on the next invite list, that'd be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Kath. That would be great. We look forward to that. We're moving along now to agenda item 8, the budget working group feedback. And we don't have a volunteer that we had pre-planned, but I have Paul is raising his hand. Paul, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It's regarding item 54 on page 32, Schools Forum membership update.
Yes.
It's with regard to the process for obtaining governor representatives. If my mind serves me correctly, my memory rather, it was an incredibly short period of time that was allowed for governors to actually put themselves forward or be nominated for membership to Schools Forum, and I think it's an unreasonably short period of time to get anybody interested. So I know we've still got 2 governor representatives short on the latest membership update, and I was wondering if we could look at an alternative method or a longer period of time to receive nominations and hopefully attract more governors onto the Schools Forum.
Thank you, Paul. Actually, I'm sorry I didn't point that out, but I had every intention of covering that particular issue on agenda item 9. But I'll just answer your question now. In fact, the next election is the autumn term, so I think we can take on board your comment there about needing to make sure that we maximize the amount of time. But in fact, I believe that if we had received any nominations sooner than that, we can proceed more quickly. We don't necessarily have to wait to the autumn election if we had any ad hoc arrangements that can be put in place sooner than that. But if Karen wants to come in from a logistical point of view, or Kath on my comment there, we can go into a little bit more detail on agenda item 9.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. The nominations process can be reviewed again to make sure that it's that the nominations are sent out well in advance. So I can speak to governor support about that.
Thank you. I think that will be very welcome, and thank you, Paul, for raising that. May I turn now to Brian Rowe?
Thank you, Chair. I do apologise, but I was waiting to raise a point from matters arising, and then you seem to skip on to me, or maybe I was too slow, I'm sorry. But on page 37, the selective admissions criteria at Old Swinford Hospital School, I do know that I think there's over 35% of the new intake will be selected on the basis of some ability test or quality. And I just wondered, are we happy that that fits in with Dudley's equal opportunities policy? Because parents can apply, they've got to do a separate form for Old Swinford in addition to the Dudley one, and they can also add other things. And I suspect there may well be interviews as well. I'm just worried that our equal opportunities might be affected or impacted, and particularly local schools are going to be missing out on maybe some very talented pupils.
Thank you, Brian, and I apologize for going so speedily in my enthusiasm through this. So thank you for reminding me to slow down. Very, very important point. I will ask Kath if you'd like to come in and comment. I do note in the second paragraph following the paragraph Brian has pointed out, that the decisions actually didn't rest with the local authority, was my understanding, and that it was a DFE decision. But I don't know if any of our officials would like to come in, Kath or Jeremy.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. You're absolutely right, Chair. It wasn't our decision. It is a sort of a DFE decision. I would expect, as with anybody selecting children for school, whether it's application or whatever, that equal opportunities applies, and that that would be adhered to, because that's not a Dudley criteria, it's an actual national criteria around equal opportunities, and that no child's discriminated because of their race, sex or anything of that sort of thing. So it wasn't our decision, but I am assured that equal opportunities, which is a national directive, that it would be followed. I know that this has caused a number of angst amongst heads around this decision, but it was out of our hands, and we are where we are, really. So we can watch and monitor to ensure that there isn't discrimination happening, but that's where we are, really. I don't think I can add any much more on that, to be honest with you, Chair. Helen, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, Kath, I think you've said it, really.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kath. Thank you, Helen. And Brian, thank you for your point, which will be noted. May I move on to Rebecca Cox?
Yeah, I was just going back to my emails on your point about the breakdown for 10 non-SEN pupils, because I couldn't remember reading it, but I've just gone back to it. And the email states the 10 pupils budgeted for from independent non-SEN sector are all of secondary age. And that was it. And I don't think that's enough detail for what personally I would require as to why are they in independent schools. It just says they're secondary.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Again, I'll pass over to my colleagues, Kath or Helen, if you have a comment.
I'll take this. Rebecca, I need to take that away because Neil responded to that. So are you asking for more information?
Yes, please. It's just to understand really why there are 10 children without SEN needs who are independent placements, because it is costing quite an amount of money, and it's just understanding why.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other, thank you.
Go on, Rebecca. Was you going to say something else? Go on, Rebecca.
Thank you very much for that. And then just the other point on the email says about the total cost of schools forum is 6,166. And again, there's no breakdown of what that is. Why does school forum cost £6,000? I'm probably naive, but I don't understand where the cost lies.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll take that away.
Okay, Stacey.
Shall I just comment there? Okay, I think a large chunk of that charge is around the time that we have from Democratic Services for Karen to support us on that. So we have to pay for that service, and also any room hire or catering provisions that come through as well. So we can provide further breakdown, but that's in a nutshell what we have to pay for to administer Schools Forum.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for that response. And we'll look forward to a little bit more information that should be forthcoming shortly. So, Rebecca, I think you still have your hand up. I don't know if you have another point to make, Rebecca, or if you just need to put your hand down. Okay, thank you. We're all getting used to this. And there's so many people on the list, I have to scroll up and down to make sure I'm not missing any hands. So please apologize for the slight delay as I just check to make sure we have no more hands up, and we don't. So I'm going to make one more call for any more matters arising. And I do not see any further indication on that. So I believe we're now ready to proceed to our next item, which is the feedback from the Head Teachers Consultative Forum, which is our budget working group. We don't actually have, we haven't arranged a volunteer ahead of time, so I wonder if I have any colleagues who attended that meeting who'd be willing to give a brief verbal feedback on the spot. If anyone is able to do that, would you like to raise your hand? And I've got Helen. Helen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to feedback, and I know there's a number of heads on the call currently that were involved. They attended the budget working group, so they might want to just respond as well. So in terms of the feedback, we had a conversation, quite a detailed conversation about IDPs. And about some of the forms around schools capital projects and how we're going to start taking those forward. So we've made some slight changes to those, but it was about sharing the forms and the process with heads at budget working group. We talked about the dedicated schools grant and budget planning for 21-22, and we talked about the financial recovery. And we talked about what that might start to look like, particularly around SEND and the changes in relation to that, and around COVID. We did raise the potential of a disapplication, of which we talked about, and we didn't follow through last year, but we are looking at that for this year. And we talked about that budget working group and around the budget planning. We had a long presentation in relation to the Specialist Inclusion Service Review, quite a detailed presentation, just to ensure that schools were cited on that review. That was concluded at the end of this year, and that was a consultation paper opening up questions, and as I said, the consultation to schools as well. And then we talked about all the reports that were coming here this evening, and I think that's it. I don't know whether anybody else wants to add to that.
Thanks, Helen. It might just be worth adding that we did have for information the risk protection arrangement, which is going to be brought to the next budget working group.
Yes, okay. Sorry, Remley. Yeah. Yes, sorry about that. Yep.
Great. Thanks for doing that, Helen, without warning. I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll try to organize it more systematically for next time. Okay, do I have any questions about budget working group anyone would like to put to Helen? I mean, a lot of the detail is going to be covered in future agenda items momentarily. Okay, thank you. Right, moving on then to item 9, we have the Schools Forum membership update, which you will find as agenda item 9 on page 1. And I'm going to hand over to Kath to take us through this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So I'm assuming people have read the paper, and notwithstanding the earlier comments around timeliness of people having an opportunity to nominate, which I think Karen's taken away, the Schools Forum are asked to approve the updated position in respect to the membership for Dudley Schools Forum, which is effective from the 1st of May. And at the moment we have vacancies, so in terms of governors, we have no further nominations following Jill Belcher from Petershill Primary will continue in the post, but with no other further, so we've got a vacancy there. And bearing in mind what Paul said earlier on, we'll see if we can't sort of get somebody in a timely manner on that one to see if we can get somebody in. We've no nominations have been received for the vacant post for secondary school governors, so we'll I think Karen will need to put some effort into just seeing if we can get encourage some nominations there. From Academy school members, we've had, following the receipt of 5 nominations across Dudley Academies, Academy members have been appointed for a 3-year term of office. They are Miss Jo Higgins, Mr. Chris Christophorou, Mr. Christopher Finney, and I think it's Finty, is it? I think that's a spelling mistake.
Yeah, Finity.
Finity. Mr. Mark Moody, Mrs. Rebecca Cox, and Mr. Matthew Minot. For Academy members, non-school members, Dudley 16 to 19 further education. It's yourself, Chair, who's kindly said you'll continue to represent for 3 years. And it's just any questions really from, we've obviously got the Appendix 1, which is the wider school forum membership, and I suppose really it's just taking any comments and observations, notwithstanding the school governor comments that were made earlier on, that we will address and certainly try and encourage some governors to come onto the forum.
Thank you, Kath. So over to colleagues for any questions or comments. I don't think I guess we do have. What's that, Rebecca? Yes, Rebecca Cox, please.
Me again. I'm just pointing out that it's Sally Bloomer, not Sarah Bloomer for Woodside.
Okay, thank you. We'll correct that. Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us, excuse the dog. That takes us to agenda item 10. We're moving on to the combined services budget outturn, and I'm going to hand over to Stacey Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Okay, so this is just a very brief report because we're going to be covering the detailed service provision in the next item. But basically, it's just for Schools Forum to note that the outturn position for the combined budgets for 1920 financial year. Table 1 sets out all of the expenditure on the different items, and paragraph 9 references that we had a budget identified of £209,000 for 1920, and we can confirm that we've actually spent all of that allocation on those combined services, those combined budgets for 1920. So unless there's any questions, that's really it for that report.
Okay, so as Stacey's pointed out, there's going to be more in-depth discussion on the subsequent agenda item, but for the moment, with that information presented, any questions for Stacey? Okay, and this is to note, so I think with that kind of context will serve as a very good preface to the next item, which is agenda item 11, the report of the Interim Director of Children's Services. That's the Combined Services Provision Report, and for this I understand we may have a team effort presented by both Jeremy and Helen.
Yeah, I'm happy to start that, Remley. I'll just ask for you to be patient with that. I've obviously been in post now for 2 weeks and 2 days, so I prepared the report and present it to you, but obviously the detail behind it and the questions that you may wish to ask might be better referred to someone else, because this was data that was presented and put together by my predecessor, Neil. So I'm happy to present it to you, but the level of detail that I have around the level of the knowledge and the the data, I just wasn't imposed in 2019-20, so I'll present it to you, but politely decline. I can't answer the questions.
Okay, well, I think thank you for that. We're looking forward to your presentation, and we'll certainly have a discussion afterwards, and then there'll be some decisions for us to make. But I'll hand it over to Jeremy to get us going.
Well, essentially, it's just looking at, it corresponds to the item that Stacey's just put to you, which is the budget outturn, and the 6 areas of expenditure relate to the 6 activities that are detailed in the report. So there was 6 main projects: Astley Births Outdoor Centre, Activity Centre. There was funding for the Stay and Safe on school trips, which had a particular reference to an online package that's been used to do the risk assessments. There was a funding and an education lead for the domestic abuse and referrals team, that's known as DART. It also funded the school safeguarding trainer. The 5th post was a place planning support officer, which is quite hard to say when your mouth's getting dry, and an input into someone to work with the pupil census data and info team. So it corresponds with the budget that Stacey's just presented to you. So those are the 6 areas.
Thank you. And I understand that, just to put this in context so that we're all understand that this item had been presented previously, but Forum felt that we needed a little bit more information, some more time, really, a little bit of a further breakdown. Hence this report, agenda item 11, and we had delayed decisions on the funding that you see. It might be helpful if you actually refer to page 7, where the list that Jeremy just took us through is detailed. And we will go in a moment, we will go through all those individually to try to reach a decision on that. But what we're looking at is whether or not we will fund those activities from September 2020 through March 2021. So I don't know, Helen, if you have anything else to add or if we'd like to open up for discussion.
I don't really, other than that there's more detail in this paper. I think I would have liked to have given more detail around 2 particular positions. But we're working on that at the moment, and I think I'll raise that in budget working group to heads. So as I said, we're trying to get as much information as possible on these positions.
Right. Thank you. So that's, if I've understood correctly, Helen, that's a work in progress then?
Yeah, I think in terms of the 2, where you might see that the school safeguarding trainer and the education liaison one, that is the 2 areas that we're getting more information on. So I'd strongly suggest that they are approved, because they're absolutely critical positions, with a reassurance and a guarantee that we will be supplying a lot more information going forward.
So for the purposes of today, we need to make a decision if Forum will support funding those activities from September 2020, as I said, through March 2021. That will give us more time to consider the information that will be forthcoming to make a decision about funding from the 1st of April 2021. Do we have any questions or comments from before we turn to making decisions on each of these items individually? Okay, Angela.
Hi, it's just to say I think we have previously requested it. I know I was the person previously saying that we hadn't had a huge amount of detail, but it is something that we'd asked for, not just at the last meeting, but prior to that, and going back into the last year. And just the point that we made was that if we were in our schools not being able to account for £78,000 in detail, that obviously that would put us in a difficult position with the governing body. So just applying that same principle really, and reiterating what I know other heads have previously said about the level of detail. So I appreciate what Helen said, but it's the fact that, you know, it is information that's been asked for previously in more detail. That's it.
Thanks, Angela. And I think we have noted that, and we will note that again. And I know Helen's very keen to get us that information as soon as she can. Okay. Any other comments or questions? So if I just confirm with Karen that we need to move to a decision on each of these items individually. So if I can ask, it might be helpful, as I said, for colleagues to turn to page 7, where you see the table 1 with each item with the value detailed there for you, and we'll take them each individually on a vote. Karen, is that correct? You just make sure I'm doing the right thing.
Yes, Chair, that's correct. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we'll begin with Astley Burf Outdoor Activity Center. May I see a show of hands for support of funding that from the 1st of September to the end of March 2021? Oh, I should have confirmed who can vote. I believe everyone can vote on this. Is that right, Karen?
Yes, that's right, Chair.
Yes, everyone can vote. Okay. Thank you. I think we have most votes. I know Angela hasn't been able to use her icon, but I saw her hand raised. So if we count Angela as a yes on that item.
Yes, Chair, just to confirm, there were 16 votes for approval. That's the
Thank you.
majority.
Thank you. Moving on to staying safe on school trips. So if you take your hand down, and then again, if you let us know by raising your hand if you're in approval.
Yes, Chair, there's 15 votes altogether. So that's the majority.
Thank you. Moving on to DART, the Domestic Abuse and Referrals Team.
Yes, Chair, 17 votes altogether.
Thank you. School Safeguarding Trainer.
Again, 17 votes.
The Place Planning Support Officer.
It's 15 votes, Chair.
Thank you. And finally, it's the Pupil Census Staffing Support.
Seventeen votes, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, and as Helen has said, that's not the last we've heard of it. So
no, not at all. Thank you.
Thank you. That gives us a little bit of breathing time. Okay, thank you very much. I believe we are now ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is item 12, the Dedicated Schools Grant Outturn, and I'm handing over to Stacey for this item.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Okay, then, so I'm going to assume that everyone has read the report. So I'm just going to pick up some of the key points, really. So this is just really to note for Schools Forum, the outturn on the DSG and the accumulated reserve position for 1920, which shouldn't be a surprise to people because we've been talking about the overspend, you know, for a number of meetings now. But if I take you onto page 19 and the summary that's within table 1, this just identifies for you the central DSG reserve and also the school-specific contingency reserve, which we've talked to Schools Forum about previously. So as we end the end of 1920, we've actually got an accumulated deficit balance of 6.177 million on the DSG. That includes the balance that we carried forward from 1819 of £1.438 million. What that also includes is a contribution from the school-specific contingency, which Schools Forum and the director consulted Schools Forum on, around the 950k that came out of school-specific contingency to help towards that. So what I'd like to do to kind of explain some of the detail for you is if I just take you onto page 23 on Appendix A, and we'll move on to Appendix B in a moment. So the report here on page 23, this shows you sort of the overall position on the reserve for the central DSG for the end of 1920. So what that identifies for you is that the de-delegated budgets, there was a slight underspend of £10,000 on union duties at time. We also had just short of £5.7 million worth of underspend on the centrally retained budgets as well, and that was all around the high needs block, which we obviously the EHCPs, the independent placements, and top-up funding and sort of funding to go out to schools to support those EHCPs. We also had a slight underspend on the central schools block, which was incorporated within there, and also on the early years block as well. So overall, as a summary position, we have those two areas, the 5.699 less the 10k. What we also have then is the net position as we just move down to the use of the DSG reserves is this is where we reflected the 1.438 deficit that we carried forward from 18-19 and then offsetting the school specific contingency of the 950k, which I've just mentioned, which gives us our number of the 6.177. So in effect, the true position of the overspend for 1920 was the 5.689 million pounds, which, as I say, we've reduced then down to, if I take you onto table Appendix B, the next table on page 24, this sort of sets out the position in terms of the analysis on the school specific contingency to give us an overall breakdown of where we are. So, in effect, what we're saying on that first section is that we have a net overspend position on the central DSG of £4.7 million for 1920, added to the 1.438 to give us our 6.177 closing balance. And then what we have there, just noted below, is all around the school specific contingency. So this is where we have underspends that are generated from school activities, school budgets on specific either de-delegated items or adjustments that we've ring-fenced to the school specific contingency. And what you can see is if you sort of move from the column on the left over to the right, you will see the balance that we started the year with in 1920, which is our £1.5 million balance. You'll see that what we have done in the year is we've added another 160k to the school specific contingency. Some of that is around the union duties underspend and some growth fund underspend that we've got there, and also some income from schools, which as we were closing down the accounts, unfortunately we weren't able to identify which schools they related to, which maintain schools. So that's been ring fenced to the school specific contingency to allocate back out once those remittance advices and requests come back from schools to allocate that back out. So that's kind of protected in there. And then what we have then is the in-year use of reserves. So the 950k, which I've noted before, we spent £76,000 on school improvement, which again was all sort of through discussions with Schools Forum. We had excuse me, some net rates adjustments for those schools that converted to academies during the year to give us an overall in-year use of just over £1 million of reserves there out of the school specific contingency. So that then gives us a balance overall, once we sort of net all that down, that we've got a balance to take into 2021 of £638,000 there. So what we plan to do is we plan to come back to Budget Working Group and Schools Forum in the autumn and say to you, okay, then how do we spend this money, so that we're nice and transparent about that, and then we can involve you in making those decisions about how that's allocated, obviously with the 84k being protected for schools to claim back after that point. So if I just take you back to the report and just away from the appendices, and if I ask you to look just back at page 20, I just want to draw your attention to the changes that have happened sort of since since we've sort of started 1920 really, and where we are currently. And paragraph 15 just sets out for members that the DFE are yet to release the template that the Chief Finance Officer needs to complete for 1920 around the use of reserves and the assurance testing that we have to do as a local authority to provide assurances that we've spent the grant in the appropriate way. We're expecting that because we have breached the percentage around the deficit, that we would have to present something and report back to the DFE, although I don't know what that looks like yet. So what we will be doing, as soon as we've got that information, we will bring that back to Forum in the autumn and just share that with you so that it's all nice and sort of well shared, transparent. Paragraphs 16 and 17 make references to changes that the DFE have put in place to the financial regulations around the sort of covering of the DSG overspends going forward. So basically, we are not allowed to transfer in any funding from the general fund, from the council's general fund budget. The DSG deficit must be met from within the DSG funds going forward, and a financial plan must be put in place. The only way that the council can actually get any of the general fund local authority budgets, council tax funded monies to offset this deficit is if we apply to the Secretary of State and seek permission. So that's really clear, whereas when we were operating with the previous disapplications to topsides of schools budget, we were still uncertain whether the local authority would be expected to contribute monies and whether we were allowed to do that. The DFE with SITFA, the accounting organisation that sort of rules our accounting mechanisms, they have been clear to say now that that's not the case, so we would have to go to the Secretary of State. So that really is sort of all I want to make reference to in this report. So over to anyone that wants to ask any questions.
Thank you, Stacey. That was really helpful. I know I've got two colleagues who have their hands raised, and I'm not sure if that's a carryover from the previous item, but I'll just ask anyway. Jeremy, do you have something you'd like to add? Jeremy Keeble, if not, yeah, okay.
I apologise, I left my hand up.
No problem, we've all done it. Joe Higgins, your hand is still up. Do you have something you'd like to say?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think if I could take everyone back, I think it was about January when we had a meeting to look at the national funding formula predicted allocations for school with Kath Knoll at Saltwells. And we talked about the need to be really proactive and strategic about managing the deficit, particularly around high needs block. And already we've heard from Rebecca Cox about secondary school learners, students in independent placements. We're not quite sure what the rationale is about that. We know that in Dudley we have a real lack of specialist provision with learners with significant SEND needs. I don't want to be dramatic, but SEND I think has been in a crisis in Dudley. We have cases where young people are in mainstream schools for whom we can't cater. And I know Neil Hoskinson has moved on, but prior to lockdown, he met with me to suggest that Dudley Academy Trust would meet with Invictus and Windsor Academy Trust, and we've got Hales Valley here and Ignite Trust, and obviously lots of representation for maintained schools. It was really to sort of reignite that really important discussion we had back in January with Kath about setting up, I think, for the autumn term, a strategic group to look at how we deal with the needs of young people within Dudley, and how we actually look at pooling resources, looking at strategy, how we already will have potential resource between us as trust that we could use as an interim measure. And of course, at some point, free schools are probably going to come back on the agenda. And I did some work with Neil Hoskinson around, a potential bid for an AP provision. So we don't have the answers now, but I think one of the reasons that myself and Chris wanted to join the forum is to say now that Dudley Academies Trust has been in operation for almost 3 years, we very much want to contribute to the system-wide developments for Dudley. And Chris and I are both more than happy to, open up that dialogue and invite colleagues, any colleagues, of course, local authority representatives as well. I'm sure Kath recalls our discussion. And that very early on in the autumn term, we all meet and we start to really set out a strategy for addressing this. So that's really what we would like to propose.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. I believe Helen would like to come in.
Kath, do you want to go first?
I was just going to say that yes, I do recall the conversation, and Helen and I both are very keen on this. I'm going to let Helen answer this because I know that Helen's been leading this as part of the SEND recovery that we've been doing. So I just wanted to acknowledge what was said there, and yes, I do remember that conversation. So just to acknowledge.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, really, Joe. And we're in the throes, actually. That we're in the middle of trying to organise a meeting with the four CEO mats, including yourself, to have that very conversation. Because it's important that we really start picking that conversation up and taking it through from the conversation we were having at Saltwells. I think we were all acknowledging that this send improvement is quite a challenging journey for us in Dudley. It's going to be a long, challenging piece of activity, but we're very keen to pick up that conversation with yourselves. And as I said, we're in the throes. Just Jeremy and myself had a conversation last week where we said we needed to meet with the CEO mats, secondaries in particular, because that's the area of real focus for us as well. And we will hopefully that meeting should be arranged shortly. And I don't know whether Jeremy wants to add to that, because it's just quite spooky that we've not long had that conversation, have we, Jeremy? So
Yeah, yeah, I said earlier, give me a little bit of slack on the last item, but in terms of the sort of 12 days I've been with Dudley, probably 90% of the conversations I've had with Helen have been on exactly that theme, that we do need to be much more proactive with our inclusive strategies and getting on the front foot. I think we agree that we're doing quite a lot of reactive stuff around AP strategy and written statements of action, whereas if we had a coordinated plan at the centre, we'd be working in a totally different way. So that's probably the focus of what we've been discussing in the last couple of weeks. So that is going to be rolled out. And I think, Joe, there's a meeting myself having with you individually, and then, as Helen said, with all the CEOs from the mats. And we're going to start rolling out a strategy further to those discussions. So it's very high on the agenda.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. We're very keen to participate in that and collaborate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for that. Do I have any further comments or questions on this item from any colleagues? Okay, I believe we're, Stacey, again, thank you for that. That was really very, very clear. We're going to move on then to item 13, the school reserves outturn, and this is an item to note, and for this I'm going to hand over to Jane to take us through this paper.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this report is explaining the reserves position for maintained schools in Dudley for the end of the financial year 1920. The recommendation for Schools Forum is just to note, this report is just for you to note. I'm going to go straight on to the second page, 26, to table 1. So you can see there that overall we've had a reduction in schools reserves from 9.684 million to 9.128 million across the year. Specific contingency has reduced, that's your 49 reserves. Part of that is due to schools converting to academies that will take their reserve balances with them. We've seen an increase in the boarding reserve, a use of capital reserves, that's the 59 reserve of 305,000. A reduction in the capital loans reserve, so we've got no new capital loans this year, but we've obviously had the repayments to the existing loans. Same with the licence deficits, no new licence deficits in 1920, but repayment of existing ones. And then we've had some use of reserves there for schools to balance budgets as well. So that's the explanation of the use of reserves there. Just a note at the bottom of that table as well, just to show you that the 1920 roll forward, so that's the balances at the end of the year for the maintained schools, was 1.952 surplus. So that's made up of 2.298 million surplus balances and 346,000 of deficit balances, netting that off. And then table 2 really is just showing you the movement of reserves in a slightly different way. So again, you've got your starting point of 9.684 million. In year, schools utilised almost £3.7 million of those reserves, but added 1.4 million. Those are mainly transfers into capital reserves. And then you've got the in-year surplus and in-year deficit figures there that I referred to earlier. and the balances transferring to Academies on conversion. So moving on to table 3, that's looking at trading accounts. So that's out of after school activities, before and after school clubs, adult education. So again, a reduction in reserves there for school trading account. So then the next few paragraphs there relate to the balance control mechanism within the scheme for financing schools. So within that scheme, there are provisions in place for the Director of Children's Services to claw back reserves from schools, providing certain conditions are met. So at the end of the financial year, we had 3 schools that had balances greater than those permitted within the balance control mechanism. So that's schools that had balances of greater than 8% for primary and special and 5% of budget share for secondary. One of those schools, the value was very small, so it was decided that that wouldn't be considered for clawback. And the other 2 schools, after providing explanations as to why they had excess reserves, it was decided that those reserves would be clawed back. The value of those is £66,451. The next paragraph refers to schools that used reserves to balance their budget for 2019-20, and the balance control mechanism there states that if not all of those amounts are required, again the director can claw back any surplus amounts. There was 4 schools that did that. 2 schools did use all of those reserves. 2 had excess amounts. The decision here does say that those reserves were clawed back, but that decision has been reversed now following further discussions with those schools. So none of those, neither of those 2 schools have had their reserves removed. They have both retained those. At the end of the year, we had 7 schools ending the year in a deficit position. Some of these had already notified the local authority, and we're working with those schools now, and we're asking them to provide details, all 7 of them, as to how they're going to fund those deficits going forward. And in most cases, those deficits will be deducted from the 2021 budget. A couple of schools, and there's further work ongoing with the local authority to look at how those deficits can be recovered. And then just a final point, point number 13. We had 2 schools operating with licence deficits during 1920. As I said before, we've got no new licence deficits, and 1 school now has repaid the final balance in 2019-20. So going forward, we've just got 1 school going into 2021 with a licence deficit. I think that's it. Unless anyone's got any questions.
Okay, let me begin with Brian Rowe. Brian, if you just unmute your mic.
Thank you, Chair. I think that is an improvement. I mean, it's only a couple of years ago we were talking about reserves of 16 million, but 9 million's still too much. If that's replicated all over the country, that's a lot of money that's not gone into the current education. But every year when this item comes up, we've been told there are 3 schools who haven't worked within the 8%. I just wonder, this year, I asked this question last time, and it was the same 3 schools. Is it the same 3 schools again? And then that money, where we look as if we've been tough with them and taken that money centrally, the last time I asked about it, I was told it was given back. So it doesn't seem much to the school. So it doesn't seem much of a punishment. Is that the case still?
Answer that, or if you want to, or if Kath wants to answer that. No, last year, yes, you're correct, and money was retained centrally from a school, and then it was put to one side for school improvement purposes and given back to the school for school improvement, and that isn't the case this year. These reserves have been retained, will be retained centrally.
The 2 schools where we did sort of the school submitted further evidence of why we felt was a reasonable argument that they gave us, and on balance we said that we accepted that they weren't actually going over the 8%, if I remember, Jane, and that was this was the other part. There's two parts to this, Jane, correct me if I'm wrong. There is if you're over the 8%, we can claw back, but there's another part, is it? And then we'd applied the other part, had we not, Jane? The other right. And when they'd put the argument about not the 8%, the other right, that we said on balance we would support them on this occasion, but it was on this occasion, and really, the marker is down. I will be doing this. I will be exercising my rights to be able to do this where I feel it's needed. But I'm not averse to hearing a reasoned argument if one's given to me. So I'm not totally cold-hearted. Although you might think it when you have a conversation with me and I'm taking your money off you, but I'm not totally cold-hearted on that. But Jane, do you want to explain that second part that I'm?
Yeah. I think Brian's question was referring to the schools over the 8%, wasn't it? I think just confirming that, because last year, Kath, there was one of the schools where we retained the reserves over 8%. Then those reserves were given back to that school because they were put to one side for a specific purpose. And then the school did the same specific purpose, but that isn't the case this year. I think, is that what your question was?
Yeah,
Brian?
we have taken
Those.
Yeah, we have taken them. Yeah, sorry, Jane. We have taken those that have gone over 8%.
Yeah.
So we've applied that rule.
Yeah. Is that okay to answer the question?
Can I come back, Chair?
Yes,
Yeah.
Brian. Yes, please.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. But I want to know really, if that money's been retained centrally and you've looked at these schools that now have got a deficit and are facing a reduced budget next year, do they deserve that? Have they been financially inept, or do they need to have help from that retained budget to help them next year? And the other thing I'd like to know is, how far off is the other school with a licence deficit in repaying that debt?
Jane, can you answer?
In terms of the licence deficit, they're 3-year loans. So that is the agreement. So 2019-20 was the first year of the licence deficit for that school. So they've got 2 more years. And then there is the option for the school to repay the debt early, but they don't have to do that. The agreement is for 3 years.
Jane, in terms of the schools where there's a deficit, I think you'd explained earlier on that we were working with those schools to help them with that recovery, and if they need support from us, then they will get support. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have also, there's 2 particular schools that we're working closely with, and then other schools, if we're seeing schools that are constantly in a deficit position each year, then, we're contacting those schools to try and discuss that further with them.
Okay, Brian, does that answer your questions?
It does. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have the next in line is we've got Rebecca Cox to come in. Rebecca?
Hi, I've been contacted by one of the schools, and obviously I won't name them. I don't know whether Kath and Helen can say, is this one of the schools that you think is referred to here? One of the primary schools?
Yeah, there was one that we sorted. Yeah.
I just wondered, because obviously it caused that head teacher at such a tricky time quite a lot of angst with regards to the fact they were going to lose go get a claw back. So I wondered, was there any conversations had with this head teacher prior to that person being made aware of the clawback? Because it just seemed to be sprung upon them, and then they had to explain to you why. And is there any consideration, because, and I know it's very specific to this school, but there are falling roles in some schools and people are having to hold on to some money to see them through for staffing rather than making redundancies?
Jane, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I can answer that. In terms of the school, it being dropped upon the school, it shouldn't be dropped upon the school because it's part of the scheme for financing schools, which is agreed annually with schools. We consult on that with maintained schools, and it's agreed at schools forum. It should also be part of the planning process for the school. So, you know, I think head teachers and governors should be aware that there is this clause in the scheme for financing schools, so it is a possibility. And yeah, I agree, you know, that it can be difficult with schools if they've got falling roles, and I think it's just it's not meant to be trying to penalise schools for making savings. So I think it's to encourage savings. You know, they've identified areas of savings and not just using reserves as a quick fix to offset budgets, rather than looking at each budget category in detail. But it shouldn't be a shock to schools. They should be aware of that clause in their school for financing scheme.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Kath, did you want to come in again, Kath?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, thank you. And just to sort of reiterate what Jane has just said around it shouldn't be a shock, but I think what it probably was a shock, and I'll acknowledge that, Rebecca, but I think that's linked to communication, and certainly I think that might be on the agenda a bit later on about how effective is the communication, both from Schools Forum and Budgets Forum, and people understanding what decisions are made, or when we sort of reference you know, that this is what we'll be doing and this is what's happening, how that gets disseminated out to all school members, because I'm conscious that we just have a you know, a cohort on here, nominated membership here, but how do we disseminate that? And I Chair, I believe that's something that you might raise a bit later on as a sort of a strategy that we need to think about, because clearly it is there. It has been raised before. It shouldn't have been a surprise, but it clearly was for this head. So therefore, there is a question around the communication on it, I would say, Chair, with respect.
Right. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, we do have an agenda item where we'll point something out there coming up on the communication of forum. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to Joe Higgins.
Yes, thank you. My point really is in relation to the point that I think it was Brian made about the 9 million reserve actually being better than 16 million. And it was really, from a secondary point of view, to state that I think there's some work we could potentially do in Dudley with secondary leaders around using the curriculum-led financial planning tool efficiently, which advocates a 0.78 contact ratio. And speaking from personal experience, when we took the 4 secondary schools in Dudley, one of us, all were way below that, and actually one had a contact ratio of 0.56. So actually there's work to do, I think, strategically and very proactively, again, with leaders of our secondary schools to look at using that as a framework. And of course, sometimes you can have a more favourable contact ratio if you have a rationale for it. But my experience of working nationally on this with many schools is that often, actually, the funding, we'd always argue for more funding, of course, in schools, but often the funding just isn't being deployed in the right way. Now, we're happy to share some of that around the work that we've done as a trust. And we normally find that it's hugely enlightening when we do this work. So I would just say that from the budget consultation group, potentially, if they would like to look at that with us, we're happy to do that and share our experience. But it's a fantastic strategic planning tool moving forward. So I'm just sort of suggesting that as something we might look at proactively across the borough.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'm wondering if we can take that to budget working group to consider further. Helen, is that something that you think would be appropriate?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Joe and Helen. Let's go over to Jill. Jill Belcher. Jill, I don't know if you're talking. Could you unmute your mic, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so with a slightly different hat on, I also chair Dudley Association of School Business Leaders, and the toolkit that we've just mentioned is something that we've had a number of people come and discuss with us from professional associations. So again, we're always looking for business leaders from your schools, primary, secondary academies to come along, and they might be able to get some benefits as well as secondary discussions that are taking place with head teachers. But the business leaders group is a strong group in Dudley, and we'd really encourage head teachers to support their business leaders coming along to those meetings and conferences that we're running. So just a bit of a plug, really, please.
Yeah, Jill, I wonder if if that can be advertised through the bulletin that goes out.
Yes, we could. It's something that's on Revolution. So it is on Revolution already as a traded service. So, but if anybody wants to contact me direct or their business leaders, they're more than welcome to do so.
Thank you, Jill. So if anyone wants to contact, that's Jill Belcher. Thank you. Okay, any further comments, questions for Jane on this item? Okay, I think don't see any further hands up on that item. So if we move along to item 14, I think we're still with Jane, and Jane will take us through the Dudley Scheme for Financing Schools, and this is a consultation, and we are to note this. Over to you, Jane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is just to note the proposed amendments to the Scheme for Financing Schools. We will be going out to consultation with head teachers shortly. Head teachers and all schools, maintain schools over the summer regarding these changes. So the Scheme for Financing Schools was last updated in June 2019. We update it annually. There is a DFE update that comes out annually that is shown on paragraph 7. I'll put you the link to that, the Scheme for Financing Schools. For this year, the DFE updates are really just minor or presentational changes. Those are listed in the appendix, and you'll see there's no great changes on there. But we have to consult with schools about any changes that we want to make locally. Just paragraph 8 talks about a brief consultation with schools. Just on further discussion with Kath, we've decided that we will have a slightly longer consultation, so we'll be starting that shortly. And that will continue on until the middle of September, and we'll report back in October Schools Forum of the results of that consultation. And then the outcomes of the consultation will be presented to Schools Forum, and it will be down to Schools Forum as to whether the changes that we're proposing to the Scheme for Financing Schools are agreed. So I'm going to skip over now onto the next page, proposed amendments, which starts in paragraph 12. So these are, as I said, the DFE amendments, just presentation and minor changes, but locally we want to make some changes as well. So obviously we've updated the scheme to reflect the new structure, and you'll see in the old scheme there's a lot of references to Director of People Services and the old council structure, so those references have been changed to reflect our new structure. We're proposing to put a section in that gives some guidance on delegated banking and the use of delegated bank accounts. We feel seeing some issues and queries that have cropped up with schools recently that we need to provide some clarity there on the use of delegated banking and what that should be used for, what checks should be written for, and what they shouldn't be written for, more to the point. And then section 4, sort of pertinent point, is making changes to the balance control mechanism and the treatment of surplus balances. So we're proposing changing the percentages and the maximum limits on the reserves that are held. So for secondary schools, we're proposing to lower the percentage to 3% from 5%, and for special and primary schools to 6% from 8%. We're also proposing to add in a paragraph 18, that gives some more detail really around what reserve balances should be kept for, and the detail that should be around them, specifically capital reserves. Sometimes we see capital projects that have been going on for years and haven't actually started, so that's giving some more guidance really about what should be included in a capital reserve. So as I said, this will go to consultation. We'll come back in October with the results of that consultation and be looking to Schools Forum to agree to those changes or not.
Thank you, Jane. I think that's a really helpful context prior to the consultation, and it may be that colleagues have further questions. Do we have any? Please indicate. Okay, we'll wait for the results of the consultation then. Yes, Jane?
Angela's got a question. Angela's got a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Angela. I didn't notice your hand. Okay, Angela, over to you.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. It was just a question as to why the percentage has gone down by 2 percentage points, and why perhaps it wasn't lowered from 5 to 4 for secondary, 8 to 7, 8 to 7 for special, and why it's 2 percentage points, which obviously may have big impacts on schools. I'm just thinking about my own school, thinking it's potentially members of staff.
Yeah, well, I think it's just looking at, as we've talked before, generally about the level of reserves, about looking at the £9 million of reserves that we've got, you know, held in schools, and the situation with the deficit on the DSG, sorry, and then, you know, putting in a recovery plan really on how we're going to claw that back.
Can I also ask a question about Dudley approved capital schemes as well? And obviously some of the reserves currently held by schools might be linked to that, and things that are currently on hold. Do we know about timescales for those going ahead?
I don't know about specific schemes, no, sorry.
Stacey?
Right, shall I just add just a bit of context there in terms of the schemes? What we're looking at around the discussion that we had with the ADPs with Budget Working Group was around trying to tighten up the process so that we could discuss with schools sort of from September time onwards around their projects, to sort of ascertain what slippage we have on the profiles. We're getting a fair bit of sort of questions from our audit colleagues and corporate colleagues around the size of the slippage on the capital programmes for schools, particularly because there are, you know, sizable projects on there that have been slipped for a number of years. So it's really around just trying to review that process through the autumn, and again talk to Budget Working Group and Schools Forum about our plan changes for that, and then look to work with yourselves as head teachers and also with Kath and Helen to say, well, what can we do now to try and make this a more realistic project in terms of timescales. So it's certainly we're not sort of coming to say that we're going to be clawing money back during 2021. It's more around opening those discussions up and starting to tighten up the process on the schools monitoring. So I don't know if that helps to add any context or not.
Sorry, I was just talking about the Dudley Amp scheme. So if schools have been allocated a project and then that's not currently going ahead or is delayed, what is the situation for that? Because that will take account of a number of reserve balances.
Yes, yeah, I get you. Yes, I understand. I'm not sure. I'd have to, unless Helen or Kath can add to that.
I've looked at the Dudley Amp scheme, and I've looked at how it's worked, and I've looked at a number of sort of schemes where there's money been set aside. Some of them as far back as 2016 and 17, and we're now in 2020. So at what point do we say, is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? So for me, there's something about reviewing that scheme, being very clear and transparent around when that's happening. I've reset how I expect that to happen. We often get requests for amps to coming in February and March, so it's very last minute, and we have to then make a hurried decision, say yes, okay. So all of that's going to be sort of the proposes is that's going to be changed, so that there's a proper lead-in time, there's proper consultation with corporate landlord, because some of the schemes we know in there, you can't, there is one which I've been told can't happen. It's just It's just not logistic, yet the money's sat in that scheme. So we have to be, you know, we've been very honest, Helen and I, in being open and transparent around, we have to fix this. We can't fix it on our own. There's 9 million sat in reserves, and I've got quite a bit sat in AMP schemes that's not been used. It's just sat there, and we have to be open. This is about money to educate children, really. So if we've got an AMP scheme that's genuine, that can be done, and there's a running time for it, absolutely, you will get that endorsement. If you haven't, or it's been languishing, then there's got to be a review of, is it still needed? Can it be done? And what do we need to do? And that will be an individual discussion with schools where that's applying. And I think that's just being open and honest with you, really.
Angela, does that sufficiently respond?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any further hands. Stacey, was there one final comment you'd like to make, or do you need to just lower your hand, Stacey?
No, sorry, apologies.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Well, I hope that was helpful context prior to the consultation, Jane. Thank you for that. We're moving forward to item 15, and we'll take a look at the schools forum proposed meetings. And I know that taking a look at this just prior to this meeting, I think that there is one date, at least in item 9 on page 38, that we want to take a look at, which I believe falls in half term. But I am going to hand over to Kath, who will take us through the proposed schedule of meetings and the forward plan for the next academic year. Over to you, Kath.
Thank you. This is probably going to be a tag team with Helen. I'll just put my camera on, Helen. Get your camera on. So again, this is the recommendation is for school forum to consider the schedule of the meetings that's been proposed. The points well made by you, Chair, around the 28th of October, in that I believe that is the half term, and therefore that will cause a problem. So we'll probably need to revisit that together with the forward plan. And I suppose really what I'm looking for, with the exception of the October, it says 27th of October, that we would need to review. Is there any sort of, you know, people are happy generally with that, and is there any points that anybody wants to raise? Because I think the paper more or less speaks for itself, Chair. Unless, Helen, you want to add any more around any of the dates.
I don't think there's anything else for me to add, and I think, as you just described, in terms of the agenda items, and I think as we move into this year, I think it's fair to say there's a number of things that we're working on, and as you said, Kath, in the spirit of being open and transparent, we're very keen to put quite a number of subjects into budget working group first before we bring it to schools forum. So that schedule might change as we move into the year, as we start developing various things, particularly around SEND and the conversations that we've had this evening, and that's really what I'd like to say, is that we want to try and bring as many subjects to the table to have that debate and conversation. So I think that's all I really want to say.
Thank you. So we have a starting point. May I just clarify, please, in terms of the one date that we know has to change, will that just be, I don't know if that will come out by email as a revised table of proposed dates?
If forum is happy with that, then we could recirculate the table with that particular date noted, and we'll probably flash it in yellow to show no other date's changed. This is the date we've changed it to.
Okay.
And it can either be the week before or a week after or something like that. We just go either side of that date, however it works. So if forum are happy with that as a way to agree it, then we can do that. I'm sure that won't be a problem.
So with that point of clarification, do we have any comments on the proposed schedule of dates and or the starting point that we have attached as agenda items with the additional comments that Helen's made about having those agendas fleshed out thoroughly throughout the course of the year. Any comments, please? Okay. Looks like we have no comments, so we will await just a proposed table of dates with that one date changed.
Yeah, that's fine.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to agenda item 16. This is the Schools Forum Operational Good Practice Guide. We're to note this information. There is a point I'd like to make, but I'm going to hand over to begin with to Karen to just explain the context of this. So over to Karen Taylor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is just an update for School Forum to note, just on the latest guidance issued by the Education and Skills Funding Agency on the 28th of March. And this recent update is to reflect the introduction of the Schools Forum England Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2020, which came into force on the 18th of June. To make provisions to enable Schools Forum to meet remotely. This is until the 31st of March 2021, but obviously we'll have to take it by each day as it comes when future meetings will be held either virtually or face-to-face, whenever we're allowed to do that. And then I've just included a copy of the Good Practice Guide for members' information. Over the summer, I'll do a review of the Schools Forum Constitution just to make sure that it's updated and reflects any changes, and just make sure that it's up to date, and hopefully revisit to see if there's anything more that we can do to make it more practical and more efficient. So that's it, Chair. If anybody's got any questions or comments to make.
Thank you. If I could just kick off, and I know there's at least one colleague who's got a comment to make, point to make as well. I think it's very helpful. I know you've reissued this good practice guidance, but I think when you reread it with eyes afresh, as is helpful to do every year, particularly based on what I think have been very useful discussions throughout the course of this past academic year. I was particularly struck by, on page 73, paragraph 171, on communication processes. And I have to say, I think Karen, you do a great job at organizing us and keeping us on track, and I thank you for that. But I think that we've all will recognize that throughout the course of the past academic year, there have been times when we ourselves have questioned the efficacy with which we ourselves have been disseminating information to our colleagues in various fora. And there have been times when we questioned whether or not we could improve on that. So I would like to also throw out there, before I widen the discussion out to everyone else, the possibility that we take a look at the way Forum does communicate with our wider stakeholders whom we represent, and if there are any ways that we can improve. Clearly, we have the bulletin that's coming out through Revolution, which is really helpful, but there might be more that we would like to consider. So I put that out there as another possibility of a discussion point that colleagues may like to comment on. And I would prefer now to hand over to any of you who would like to make a comment on any of this. And I think the first hand that I saw shot up was Brian. So we'll start with Brian Rowe.
Thank you again, Chair. I do agree that is a very important paragraph, that 171. But having read this guidance, I think we're not perfect, but it is good practice and the advised good practice and the criteria for an effective school forum. How much of those points so I think the one is a bit of an exception. We could work down that avenue, but we've done fairly well, I think, over the last few years in terms of what's going on in this school forum. Thank you.
Brian, your voice broke up a little bit for me. I don't know if it did for others. Can I just make sure that I did understand your point, particularly for our notes, our minutes? Are you saying that having gone through it, you think that we're doing a pretty good job and that we don't need to berate ourselves? Was that your point, Brian?
That was exactly my point. We meet the criteria for an effective school forum in lots of ways, but I don't want to forget the paragraph 171. That's a point we can explore. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, Ruth Buttery, Councillor Buttery.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think Karen in some ways made the point right at the start of this meeting about the number of attendees that we had today. And obviously everybody's in incredibly busy lives and busy jobs, and being able to meet like this, and also from a practical point of view, not having to print so many paper copies of everything, being able to disseminate it electronically means that hopefully we can disseminate the minutes more effectively to more people, thus increasing hopefully the sort of all the different working groups that are going on, all the work of the schools forum, and the fact that hopefully more people will be able to attend virtually than they can physically. You know, if your school is the other end of the borough, to get to a meeting for 6 o'clock sometimes obviously can be very challenging. So I just think that this actually is quite a positive way forward. And obviously when the regulations, whatever the regulations might be in March 21, I think it would be good to reflect on the period of time that we have currently where we are meeting virtually, and whether that's something that we can continue in the future, or whether we do a blended version or whatever. But actually I welcome this currently. From, you know, I think we'll actually be able to reach more people, and like I said, from a council's perspective, I think it'd be quite positive.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buttery. And I think you're also making an implicit point there about how we might also help the environment in several different ways. So thank you for
yes,
that.
exactly. Yeah, less photocopying and paper being distributed.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for that. Any further comments? Brian, your hand is still up. Did you have another point, or you just need to lower it? Okay, great. So I think, well, I've at least had some consensus from Brian about paragraph 171. I think this might be something we'd like to consider. I'll hand over that thought to Helen and Kath for a future agenda item. And I'm happy as chair to discuss with you outside of this meeting any ways that we might best address our reflections on paragraph 171. Are you happy to take that, to proceed that way, Helen and Kath?
Yes, absolutely. No problem there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right. So now you've all kept your attention very well, and we're moving over to an important item here, which is item 17. I'm going to bring Jane in for this, which are the financial regs. So Jane, would you like to present this item to us for noting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is to note the amendments to the school's finance regs came into effect in February 2020, and they're just for this financial year 2021. And this is a framework that governs financing of schools and the use of the dedicated schools grant, so applicable to all schools, not just maintained schools. I'm just going to flip straight over the page onto the summary of the changes, if I can do, just to draw your attention to some of these. The first lot of changes there are referring to the national funding formula. So it's making the minimum per pupil funding levels of £3,750 per pupil for primary school pupils and £5,000 per pupil mandatory in the national funding formula for 2021. And that obviously was something that we adopted in Dudley as well. It makes reference to the minimum funding guarantee, the minimum amount and the maximum amount being set between a positive 0.5% and a positive 1.84% per pupil. In Dudley, we set that at the maximum amount of 1.84%. The next two items that it refers to in the national funding formula are items that we don't, things that we don't use, factors that we don't use in Dudley. Point 13 then refers to the extension of the risk protection arrangement. This is an alternative to insurance, which has been available to academies since 2014. And the DFE, it's an insurance scheme that the DFE are underwriting, and it's now open to maintained schools as well. This was an item that was going to come to budget working group. Somebody from insurance was going to come and talk about that, but that's been deferred to another budget working group. We do have some schools that have taken up this arrangement for financial year 2021, And for the next financial year, 21-22, we will be looking to de-delegate this, so it will be open to all Dudley schools. The next item is item number 14, which is something that Stacey's referred to in one of the other papers. Just that's confirming that in terms of a DSG deficit, that can't be funded now from the local authorities general fund, so that any deficits there just have to be carried forward. Next item referring to early years funding, that's making it part of the school regulations that local authorities pass on at least £615 per child, and that is something that we're doing in Dudley already. So those are just points to note. And then on page 79, you've got the full copy of the regs there.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for taking us through that. Any questions or comments? Okay. And that is for noting then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We've reached our final item then this evening, which is our verbal update from the Children's Directorate. And I assume this will be a team effort, perhaps, but I'll hand over to Kath to take us through the update.
Yep, it's always a team effort. It's usually Helen and I that's the tag team. So I'm sure Helen will put her picture on again to show everybody her long hair, because she's not been able to go to the hairdresser for however many months or have her nails done. It's probably come as no surprise for any of you. It's been an intense few months thanks to COVID, but I think it's been a real positive, if I'd like to say. We obviously went into lockdown on a Friday and then started again on the Monday in a whole new world. We set up weekly calls, which were literally daily, through our township heads, and I think both Helen and I have found those really useful, and I believe the heads that have been on that call have been very useful. We've lived through what has been the free school meals saga, and Eden Med, if I dare say that name to some heads, they'll say, "Ooh, go away." It's the new send word for Helen. She's lived and breathed school vouchers. We've sort of lived and breathed the enormous amount of guidance that's come out often on a Sunday, and I have lots of new contacts in my phone from heads saying, "Kath, have you seen this latest guidance?" which comes into effect on the Monday. So, but we've done it. We've laughed, we've cried, we've moaned, we've screamed "arg" a few times, but actually I think it actually brought us together. I think it became a real team effort, and the meetings have been exceptionally productive. The schools have absolutely gone above and beyond, heads and staff. We've tried to think ahead all the time. We've planned all the time. We had a really good meeting with the MPs the other day, which again was the schools were able to get their voices over. We have a really good interface with the DFE and the React, and we've taken the schools' messages and we brought the answers back. And then when they've not given us the answers, we keep taking the messages until they give us the answers. So it has been a real team effort, to be honest, and I think it's brought us closer together. And I know Helen and I have been grateful for the open and the honesty and the can do, will do, we'll sort this, but this has been not an easy period. Within all of that, we've had to maintain a business as usual around our improvement, around safeguarding children. We've got our designated school leads that meet on a Wednesday. So really, some really good effort. And all of that, we've spun the SEND agenda and the SEND challenges. So Helen, do you want to add any more to that? A bit more?
Yeah. I think, yeah, in terms of just following on from Kath, and we'll continue to work together. We'll work through the guidance that we're hoping should be released shortly around the summer. So we'll continue to work together regarding the summer and September, whatever that brings as well. So, and I think that Kath and myself have said, and I know Councillor Buttery's got her hand up, and she'll probably say the same, that, you know, we're incredibly proud of our schools. We've worked really hard, but we've said it before and we'll say it again. Our schools have done an absolutely fantastic job, and as our early years providers as well, and our post-16 providers, to support children and young people in the borough. It's been an absolute team effort.
Yeah,
great.
Absolutely.
Shall we bring Councillor Buttery in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Helen said, just to echo that, I've sat in quite a few of the head teachers meetings, more just to get a sense of what's going on and how the head teachers are managing this situation practically, but also personally for themselves. It's been a huge challenge for us all to walk through this time. And yeah, I'd just like to put my thanks out to them. I know lots of boroughs have had a lot of issues that the schools have re-expanded or have asked for changes within structures, and our schools have stepped up to the plate every single time. That's partly why we invited the MPs onto the meeting, because I think it was really important for them to hear what it's like on the ground, the ripple effect of policies that have started in London, how they're actually worked out in reality. And there were so many positive things that have happened. There's been challenges as well, and I've been very honest with the MPs and with my colleagues around the challenges that staff have faced. But equally, I think that sort of very much can-do attitude of just working for the best for the children of the borough has been quite phenomenal. So yeah, just to put my thanks on record, really.
Thank you, Councillor Buttery. And may I ask Jody Colburn, would you like to come in?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I think I just wanted to echo what Councillor Buttery had said there. I think as a rep from the special school community, we just want to thank really Kath and Helen for their support. Obviously, dealing with some of the most complex youngsters in the borough is never easy, but certainly in the COVID-19 period, it's been particularly difficult. But I think that the honesty and the support that we've had from the local authority has been very welcomed. And I think, as we've echoed perhaps in other discussions tonight, some of the bits we can learn, I think, from this period will actually help to improve our practice. You know, some of the communication strategies we've now using the online systems, actually we can take forward and actually improve all of our practice. But I just wanted to, I haven't said anything tonight, and it was just waiting for that moment really just to echo the thanks, because I think that goes across all of the head teachers, doesn't it? I'm sure everybody else is more than happy to echo that communication sometimes on a daily basis, but certainly weekly, has helped to reassure, helped us to vent at times, to know that we're kind of in this together, and that we went into it together and we'll come out of it together. So I just wanted to thank from the special school community to say thank you for that support.
Thank you, Jody. That's well noted. And Mrs. Riley.
Yes, just to echo that really from the primary school sector, virtually every head I've spoken to has felt that the local authority have had our back over the last few months, felt exceptionally well supported, with a consistent hard work as well from those involved at the local authority. And that's something that we haven't always seen in the past, and we do really appreciate it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's really nice to be able to hear, Kath, for you and Helen and your wider team to get some thanks. You don't often do that in this meeting, so it's nice to be able to hear people extend thanks to you.
I remember, Chair, the October meeting, the very first school forum, and I remember the head saying, "Why should we trust you?" And I'm hoping now that trust has been built by the fact that we stood shoulder to shoulder with you. We led where you needed us to lead, and we helped you lead where you needed to lead. So that was the premise of where we've worked together, and it's worked and it's benefited everybody.
Great. It sounds like real collaboration. I've got Ms. Middleton to come in, please. I think we might need to unmute the mic. We still need the mic unmuted for Ms. Middleton.
Oh, sorry, you went all crackly then. I didn't hear you call me. Yeah, I just wanted to say I've got a regional NAHT meeting tomorrow with the West Midlands, and that's the sort of thanks to the local authorities, very much the message I'll be taking back. You know, the support that we've had. That's what I've heard from my members, and I think, you know, if I can just let the, you know, people from the local authority know, it will be recognised at a regional level, the support that we've had from you. So, you know, thank you very much from my you know, from my perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further comments or questions, reflections there? Okay, I believe we've covered everyone there. Helen, is that all you'd like to say at this point?
Yeah, I think so. I'm conscious of the time and people wanting to sort of get off, and it's been long days, hasn't it? And I think my computer's going to tell me I've exceeded being on it, so I'm frightened to death I'm going to be kicked out. Helen saying I might get kicked out when you pick it up. So, so yeah, I think it's been a good meeting, and it's been well chaired. So thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Great, thank you, Kath. And I believe that does take us to the end of the meeting. So at 1951, is it? Almost, there we go. Yeah. Where'd the evening go? Thank you so much, everyone, and for all of your contributions. That's very, very helpful, and look forward to seeing you at the next forum, which I believe will be in the next academic year. So we'll pick up all of our discussions then. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Thank you. Bye. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.